Item number 1. Item number 3, oath of allegiance or affirmation of a new senator. Item number 4, confirmation of minutes.
Good morning.
Madam President, and a pleasant morning to you and your staff. Pleasant morning to my colleagues here and my friends on the other side. Madam President, I stand for the minutes of the proceedings of a sitting of the Senate held at the Parliament Building, Mount Weldale, St. George, on Tuesday, the 18th of March, 2025, and Thursday, the 20th of March, 2025, at 9 a.m. I beg that these minutes be taken as read.
Thank you, Senator. Honorable members, the motion is that the confirmation of the minutes of the proceedings of a sitting of the Senate held at Parliament Building here at Mount Weldale in St. George's on Tuesday, the 18th of March, 2025, and on the 20th of March, 2025 at 9 a.m. be taken as read. All those in agreement say aye. Opposed say nay. The minutes are taken as read. Honorable Senator Adrian Thomas.
Madam President, I stand for the confirmation of the minutes of the proceedings of the sitting of the Senate held at the Parliament Building, Mount Weldale, St. George, on Tuesday, the 18th of March, 2025, and Thursday, the 20th of March, 2025, at 9 a.m. be confirmed.
Thank you, Senator Thomas. Honorable members, the motion is for confirmation of the minutes of the proceedings of a sitting of the Senate held here at the Parliament Building at Mount Weldale, St. George's, on Tuesday, 18th March 2025, and on Thursday, 20th March 2025, be confirmed. All those in agreement say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. The minutes are confirmed.
Item number 5, messages from the Governor General. Item number 6, announcements by Madam President.
Honorable colleagues, we haven't met since March, a little over 2 months ago, and much have transpired since that time. I am certain you have conducted your affairs with much enthusiasm and success. Let me first bring you the apologies of Senator Dr. Mayana Charles. Her absence is explained by her being out of state in attendance of a medical conference. Her excuse has been submitted and accepted. I wish to highlight 1 or 2 matters that I've been involved in during this passage of almost 2 months, if I'm correct. We did not meet in April, did we? I think not. So in March, we attended a meeting, March 25th actually. The Speaker of the House and I attended a meeting in Washington, D.C., convened by Parliamericas, which is the parliaments, all the parliaments of the American hemisphere, from Canada to Chile, not including the Parliament of the United States. But these 34, 35 members, the meeting was principally an annual meeting to look at issues facing the hemisphere and to prepare strategies for the year. And the topic that was most central was the question of security, responding to security. And it is in preparation for the Summit of the Americas, the 10th version, or the 10th edition of the Summit of the Americas, will be convened in the Caribbean in December, in the Caribbean state of the Dominican Republic. And that theme will be on security. So the Parliament of the Americas looked at its advisory and consultative role vis-a-vis these executives, heads of state and government who will meet in December in República Dominicana. I think it's clear to say that the North Americans, particularly the United States, tend to have a different version or different understanding of security than does at least the Caribbean and other parts of the Americas. And so in looking, let's say, in preparing for this meeting, the region wanted to get its understanding, which I dare say is much more comprehensive than that of military security, primarily by the United States. And so these documents are being prepared along with other topics of climate change and open government and so on. For the meeting in December, parliaments are expected to play a big role, and thus the meeting. I want to bring before you this morning in this context the work of one of our own scholars here in Grenada. And I have been circulating her work around the Americas because I think it really addresses the way we look at security. The work is produced by by Dr. Wendy Grenade, who is chair of the Department of Social Sciences and Humanities at SGU. And Dr. Grenade has published this book entitled Multidimensional Threats and Regional Responses to Caribbean Security. I commend you to it because when the debate comes on in December, we in the Caribbean would like to have in the forefront our own understanding and advocacy and prescriptions concerning security. My notion that is also, I think so much of it is in the book, our security is economic, it's climatic, it's military, you know, the entry of small arms into the Caribbean region may not be of concern to the producers of small arms, but we certainly, and Dr. Grenade, I believe, looks at that as well. So I commend it to you, multidimensional threats and regional security, regional responses to Caribbean security, Wendy Grenade. And you can find her, you know, in and around St. George's and in and around Grenada. My second report is another parliamentary meeting, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, CPA, which is over 100 years. It evolved logically, one would say, from the Commonwealth countries. Now it is Commonwealth Plus. I think I mentioned here that countries like Togo and others are indeed attempting to become members. And the CPA highlighted in the meeting which was convened in London in May 13th and 14th, highlighted its transition from being a charitable organization to being a non-charitable international organization. So it can be more of an advocate. It can have a stronger and more open agenda. It can partner with other groups and so on. And the CPA annual meeting, all the members will be, last year we convened in Sydney, Australia. And this year, again, the Caribbean will be hosting the annual meeting of the CPA in Barbados in October. So we are going to see quite a bit of parliamentary diplomacy in the Caribbean region this year. The other announcement I'd like to say relates now to all our internal work. To report that our 4 committees, the Senate has 4 standing committees, and these finally have convened under our watch at the beginning of the year. I want to thank all the members of the various committees, the Committee of Selection, the Committee Standing Orders Committee, the House Committee, Committee of Privileges. Thank you all for your attendance, your contributions. The reports are being prepared, and there's a long list of to-do, so you'll certainly be hearing from us. On the 5th of May, I received a visit from the President and one of the officers of the Grenada Sickle Cell Association. And Senator Gloria Thomas, you would be interested to know that they consider the ministry a partner, your ministry and the Sickle Cell Association have been going around Grenada testing for sickle cell. The figures are quite high. I don't want to give a false figure here, but I think in some, either in one of the parishes or nationally, I was told that the figure is like 1 in 10 persons in Grenada. It's extremely high, either has a trait or the disease. And that is very, very high if it's correct. I hope somebody will advise me if I'm incorrect before the end of the meeting. But they are seeking a number of things to go forward, including, a location since they work virtually. And I must say that it's headed up by a former member of government, former Senator Ann Twine, who is giving it, along with others, a lot of energy and support and the testing, particularly with children, because it affects their ability to study. For those of you who don't know, the sickle cell disease was discovered when a Grenadian, Walter Clement, from St. Patrick's, went to study dentistry in Chicago in 1919 or 1914, very early in the turn of the century. And he was ill, he couldn't study, he was always in pain, he was suffering. And he was the ground zero for the discovery of sickle cell, and he is celebrated worldwide. I think I may have said this here already in Parliament. And we wish to, the Sickle Cell Foundation wishes that Grenada and Grenadians know about him and him in Sauteurs. And the Sickle Cell Foundation is interested in making that happen, and many other activities relating to treatment, to diagnosis and treatment. It is a disease in which the red blood cells curve like a sickle instead of being round, and therefore they cannot pass through your veins easily, and they cause a lot of pain and so on and so on. So we again thank and celebrate the leadership of Ann Twine for her work there in private public health support in Grenada. And lastly, I'd like to report a meeting I had with a young woman, Janelle Edwards, of the National Youth Parliament. Forgive me for naming individuals, but Senator Francis and all the other young senators in the Parliament. I'm sure you would be keen to know that there are 18 elected youth parliamentarians, and they have given us a list of their interests, climate change being one of them, the decoration of the Parliament, the grounds and the Parliament building, the research center and library for the Parliament, various topics. And if you are interested in having a youth parliamentarian as an intern, as a youth collaborator, please contact the clerk, Andrew Augustine, who is actually the mentor of Janelle Edwards. You may contact Janelle Edwards herself directly, who works out of the Ministry of Youth, or you can contact Senator Seville Francis, who is close to that whole operation and a product of Grenada's Youth Parliamentary Organization. And on that note of youthful success, I end my announcements, and thank you for your patience, because I'm sure I had some repeats in there. Thank you, Madam Deputy Clerk.
Item number 7, ministerial statements.
Our delightful senator from St. Andrews, Northeast, Senator Gloria Thomas.
Thank you, Madam President. Pleasant good morning to the entire House. I stand to share some developments from the Ministry of Social and Community Development, Housing and Gender Affairs. We continue to work at this ministry to meet the needs of society's most vulnerable people. Despite challenges, we remain committed to fulfilling our mandate to the citizens. Over the last couple of months, the ministry has implemented several initiatives, and I take the time to highlight some of these initiatives. 1, review of the seed targeting tool. Madam President, we are in the process of reviewing the seed targeting tool through technical assistance from the World Bank. The Grenada Living Condition Index was developed to ensure that selection of beneficiaries is transparent and objective. The GLCI, that is the Grenada Living Condition Index, places different weights on variables that are closely related to consumption and observable household characteristics. The weights were determined using information from the 2011 National Census and the 2008 Grenada Poverty Assessment, which is now outdated and does not reflect our current socioeconomic realities. Therefore, the review of the tool will improve targeting by facilitating more accurate beneficiary selection, and the review process includes a technical review and training of state officers in the use of the new tool. This activity has already been completed. Piloting of the tool using a small sample size of household for technical testing purposes. This has already been completed. A preliminary analysis will be conducted for initial assessment. Implementation of the pilot phase 2 using a larger sample size and a comprehensive analysis will be conducted to inform final adjustments and full implementation of the new tool. Parenting. Throughout May 2025, a series of parenting sessions were conducted in selected communities across the island, including Moncton, River-Sally, Willis, St. John, and St. David. These sessions were broadcast live to allow more persons to benefit from the information shared. The session aimed to enhance parenting skills by promoting effective strategies and approaches in raising our children. Madam President, the ministry also hosted a Corporate Partners Award ceremony at the Spice Island Beach Resort to recognize organizations that have supported the parenting educational unit over the years. The event held under the theme, Strengthening Families, Building Futures, Honoring Partnership for Resilience and Growth. This saw 31 plaques being presented to representatives of various partners and organizations. Fast collaboration. Disability support assessment. Madam President, in an effort to strengthen support for persons living with disability, the ministry collaborated with the Public Health Action Support Team, FAST, from the University of Michigan School of Public Health to conduct a week-long evaluation to assess Grenada's readiness to provide accessible services across public sectors and schools. Their assessment included evaluation of facilities, services, and policies for compliance with disability access standard. Focus group discussions with individuals living with disabilities and related organizations. Key informant interviews with ministry officials and the site visit to various public buildings. Madam President, stakeholders were engaged to better understand their perceptions and identify service gaps that need to be addressed. National Population Policy. Madam President, we have successfully completed the draft evidence-based national population policy. The aim of the policy is to guide sustainable development planning by integrating population trends into policy and program formulation. It focuses on demographic resilience, youth empowerment, migration, and aging. This framework emphasizes the importance of demographic resilience and enhancing the capacity of the population to adapt to social, economic, and environmental changes, whilst fostering linkages between set targets and our development outcomes. Grenada High-Level Policy Dialogue on Disability Inclusion. Madam President, the Ministry of Social and Community Development, Housing and Gender Affairs is presently in the process of finalizing arrangements to host a two-day high-level policy dialogue on disability inclusion, rights, protection, and state responsibility, scheduled for the 3rd and 4th of June 2025 at the Radisson Beach Resort. The event will be held under the theme, Advancing Equity and Dignity, Strengthening Disability Inclusion in Grenada's Development Framework. This today's dialogue will convene government ministers, permanent secretaries, head of departments, development partners, and organizations of persons with disabilities to examine national priorities, enhance policy coherence, and accelerate inclusive development outcomes. The program will include keynote presentations, panel discussion, thematic breakout sessions, and a policy roundtable on accessibility, accountability, and institutional collaboration. A key output will be the adoption of a call to action, a roadmap of recommendations, timelines, and responsibility to guide implementation and integrate disability inclusion across national frameworks. This roadmap will be part of Grenada's presentation at the 18th session of the Conference of State Parties to the Convention on the Rights of People with Disability, which will be held from June 10 to the 12th at the United Nations headquarters. Madam President, Grenada looks forward to being part of this very important forum. As a ministry, we continue to champion the rights of our people, improve access to social protection, educate our young women and men, provide opportunities for their empowerment as we strive to ensure that no one is left behind. Thank you.
I thank the Honourable, the distinguished Senator, and would also just like to echo the significance of your two-day seminar on disability rights, focusing on inclusion. It is truly an important development in our human rights reality in the country, and I do hope that it is well attended. And to underscore the importance of it in a second sense, in that it is the local that we can then take to the global. If we do our work at home, then when we participate in the global reporting sessions, we are on firmer, more credible grounds. So thank you. Thank you, Senator Thomas. Continue your good work. Senator St. Clair.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you. I again want to have my noted record of the appreciation to Senator Thomas, Gloria Thomas, for always, I would say always, I don't think there was a session, maybe if once at all, that she hasn't provided update from her ministry, because I keep saying this because we speak a lot about the other things, but the issue of the social and our people and so on is so important, and it mustn't lose sight. We speak about the society and what is happening, but the fabric is contained by the efforts in this social ministry, and all the support that is necessary morally and otherwise need to be given there. You know, we speak about the youths and how people misbehave, and all of these things is tied into that, the parenting and all of those things. So I always want to commend her for that obligation she provides to keeping the nation abreast. We speak about, you know, the debt service levy and what's going on with the national debt, and all of this is good on one end, and then if she don't come up with this part of it, we forget that this exists. And I think that she had to be commended constantly for this effort, and her staff too for the work that they are doing regard. The issue of the selection tool in terms of that seed program is good. From time to time you have to recalibrate, from science I would say recalibration of situations and improvement based on lessons learned. And so this is good, because what existed then, the circumstances and all of those things would have changed. And so this is good to have it been current. Of course, whilst we use the expertise of the World Bank and others, we at the same time also have to try and make sure we build our local capacity in terms of the continuity and sustainable independence in the way we handle those things. The other one I wanted to note, Madam President, had to do with the national population policy. You know, this is so important because there is so much discussion about we don't have enough population if we want to develop, but also there's a lot of things. We have a sustainable development plan, and how does the population fit into that, not only from a human resource capacity standpoint, but also in terms of our consumption not necessarily in eating, but utilization, so that businesses and services and economics can survive. What does the population look like in the next 30, 40 years? How would that person be? You know, what should they be able to do? You know, these are the sort of things we have to imagine downstream, and not just the general talk about we have to increase population, but what would they be doing? How would they be generating wealth? How would they make the country better? Would it be worse with more criminals or with better people? What would that frame be? And I think that conversation And I don't want to use your conversation. I strike that back because that is becoming a cliche. This conversation is more talk. But the action that would necessary to drive those sort of output that we're looking for downstream need to be taken on board now, so that the youth who are there now, in the next 30 years, 40 years, how do they see themselves fitting in and continuing that dream? So I think this is commendable, but I think the youth, the younger ones, has to be involved. And how do we get the elderly also to impart knowledge of their learnings and experiences from the past? So this is very good. And of course, the last one, issue of disability, is very important because, you know, people must not be left out or feel left out, you know. And because maybe you don't know how to deal with it, maybe they don't know how to accommodate for it, you know, not only in the way we build our buildings, but in the way we offer services, the way we reach out to people, the way we treat them, the way they are accommodated. They must feel less, and so on. So I think this effort need to continue in all walks of life, and it mustn't be used as a poster initiative, but as a genuine initiative, where we want to really make persons not feel, but, you know, feeling is not it. They must be part of it. They must be real sitting at the table and contributing in all different ways. You know, and particularly for the younger ones. I mean, you may say, well, the elderly one, well, they live their life already, but the younger ones who have a future of 20, 30 years in front of them, how do they see themselves fitting into this society that we're speaking about? So this is very important. And how do we cater, whether it's in the education system, whether in business services, how do we facilitate all of these things? And I trust that there will be broader discussion at the local level in terms of how we accommodate, and also get these folks to participate, because they alone know how they're feeling. As they say, they say who feels it knows it. You know, to what extent that these individuals actively involved in contributing to their feelings and their expectations, and how do we design to accommodate them in how we live. So I wanted to share these comments and commend Senator Thomas for the continued work on her staff, because she's not doing that on her own. Her staff had to be dedicated and be there with her. So this is my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sinclair, and on behalf of Senator Thomas, I thank you for your thanks to her. Other ministerial statements and comments? Thank you. Senator Rahman.
Good morning, Madam President, and thank you for the opportunity. Just a brief comment with regard to Senator Thomas and the work that she is doing. We all want to live in a productive society. And when we ask ourselves, what is the value of a human being? What is the value of a citizen of this country? And what we need to, how do we shape that citizen? That's the role that Senator Thomas plays in her ministry. A very, very, very critical role that is often overlooked, and my colleague just touched on it. Because the services that we provide to our citizens, especially the most needy of them, and in terms of the well-being, the honor that we give to them, so that they can be dignified even though they may be less fortunate than others, will have an impact on their education, their outlook in life, will have an impact on the labor force in the future, and will have an impact on our business and our economy. So I just wanted to mention that, because sometimes we think that, you know, youth that misbehave or certain programs, we don't have that problem. That's not our problem. The government has to deal with that. But that is the job of every leader in the country, whether you belong to a church, whether it's parliament, whether it's labor, whether it's business. We all have to look out for the people that her ministry seeks to uplift. So I just want to I didn't want the opportunity to pass without making mention of that, so that we remind ourselves of our responsibilities as leaders, and we don't just punch in and punch out, and we have a greater responsibility to those in society that are not, that can't help themselves. So I thank you for the good work that you do, Senator Thomas. Thank you.
Again, I thank you, Senator Rahman, for your thanks to the people who are taking care of the people of the country. It's very important, and both of you, independent senators who responded, have commented on the impact of the Ministry of Social Development on not just the youth of today, but the preparation of the youth for tomorrow. And that itself is, subject of a large conversation. Suffice it to say how grateful we are that that is happening. We have so much more to say, but just to thank you and to move on. Yes, I think Senator Andre Lewis has requested the floor and is being offered the floor, but not before I say congratulations to the workers of Grenada and to the nation on its celebration of May Day just concluded, 1st of May. Thank you, Senator Andre Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Senator. Sir, President, it's also a senator, so I didn't have it wrong. And if you will permit me, because you complimented the workers on the celebration of May Day, there was an omission that I did on May Day that I think I ought to have done. And to recognize, I want to do it here, to recognize the contribution of Senator Queens Britton. Comrade, thanks for the contribution that you made to us in St. Mark. Those of us, myself included, who had some challenges, called them at various times in the night, in the morning, in the day, and as per usual, you really stepped up to the plate. I ought to have made that recognition on May 1st, but I did not do it, and for this I wanted to use this opportunity to do that. Because you introduced the aspect of May Day, I sort of latched onto it. Thank you very much. Thanks for your contributions, my brother. You're a good guy. Yes. Madam President, I too wish to compliment the minister, but I want to go on the other side of the spectrum. That is at the homes that, the people who have contributed to our society and who have challenges today, for us to continue the work that we are doing as we look after their interests. And just to indicate that Labour, certainly one of our unions, did meet with the minister, because our approach to these industrial matters, is not a traditional or what you call a classic. Many times you do not hear of it because we are constrained with the nature of the people at the homes. And we are therefore using this opportunity to once again also, because we were in Carriacou most recently, one of the unions, the Technical Allied Workers Union, were the homes where we distributed water to all of our members in Carriacou, right? Even beyond our members, because there's a water crisis in Carriacou in terms of drinking. And as we continue to look out for the homes, Senator, I am giving you our commitment to continue to work along with you and to get more engagement as we come up with ways and means of ensuring that these colleagues, our parents, our grandparents, our friends who have contributed to our society and find themselves now in not some of the best conditions, that we continue to look after them. So I wanted to here publicly give that commitment, and therefore I look forward to, not too long from now, a continued engagement with you, re-engagement with you, and the union that met with you as we discuss ways and means of bringing practical benefits to the peoples in the home and for the workers. Because as Senator Sinclair indicated, your ministry, workers play a very important role. But the workers who toil every day, sometimes not under the best conditions, and we understand the limitations and challenges, we have to continue looking after them, and we give that commitment to work along with you. I look forward to a very soon engagement with you to continue that discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Such collaboration warms our hearts as citizens, and we look forward to residents and workers in residential homes benefiting from this pledged collaboration. Thank you all.
Item number 8, presentation of papers and reports from select committees.
Senator Adrian Thomas, Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I rise to present the following papers and reports from selected committees. I've got 3 presentations here. Number 1, Fiscal Resilience Oversight Committee 2024 Annual Report, April 23rd, 2025. Number 2, Fiscal Resilience Oversight Committee 2024 Annual Report at a Glance, April 23rd, 2025. And number 3, Proceeds of Crime, Anti-Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Amendment Guidelines 2024 to be laid for negative resolution.
I thank you, Senator Thomas. Honorable members, the following 3 papers are laid before the Senate: the Fiscal Resilience Oversight Committee 2024 Annual Report, which was issued in April, the Fiscal Resilience Oversight Committee Annual Report at a Glance version, which was also issued on April 23rd, and third and last report laid before us this morning, the Proceeds of a Crime, Anti-Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Amendment Guidelines of 2024. These reports, all those in favor of having the reports laid before us, say aye. Oops. Those opposed?
No, before it responds.
It doesn't need a vote.
No.
It just needs an acknowledgement. Senator Lewis.
Could I speak on any of the reports now before? Yes, okay.
That's correct. It's
Yes,
no vote, acknowledgement, and conversation.
Okay.
Conversation begins with you, Senator Lewis.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I just briefly wanted to touch on the FROC report 2024, that's the main report, and just to draw attention to just a few items. On page Roman numeral 30, that's 3X, under statutory bodies, just to highlight the report from the FROC which speaks, that's page Roman numeral 30, 3X. That's the main report that speaks about the need for the, and I'm making a plea that the need for the audited accounts to be laid to Parliament from the statutory bodies and state-owned enterprises. I'm just pulling that out of the report, and so just to highlight that we need to get acting on those things. So the ministers and ministries responsible for these should look into these. Then on page 31, that's Roman numeral 3X1. This must be of concern under the compliance with fiscal transparency, given how much we correctly places emphasis on accountability and transparency. I will just read what was said under the part that I am referring to. It says, in relation to the medium-term debt management strategy and audited public accounts, those were not submitted to Parliament in accordance with the legislation. This is from the FROC. This is from the committee. It also says that a report on tax concessions has not been submitted to Parliament. I'm not clear on what that means, whether or not it ought to be submitted. I would like for it to be submitted, yes, but it says, I'm just reading, it says, a report on tax concessions has not been submitted to Parliament. So these things are extremely important for us as we review the different performances and guidelines. I am now going on to recommendations. That's page 32, Roman numeral 32, 3X II recommendation. And I'm just pulling out one because it is one that the labor movement has been clamoring for years, and it has become a constant refrain of ours, and especially as we head into a new round of public sector negotiations. You see, time is longer than twine. 3 years must pass because that's the term period of the agreement that we have, and therefore by the end of this year, certainly by about the fourth quarter, start of the fourth quarter, we ought to commence negotiations for a new period to do the wages and other benefits. And the FROC is recommended. It says the FROC recommends the following in relation to the Fiscal Resilience Act, and the one is of most interest to me, says that elimination of the wage bill rule. Yes, in other words, the wage bill rule, we know, puts a statutory constraint on negotiations. That's our analysis from that may not be the reason that the FROC has made that observation, but it dovetails with something that we have been clamoring for. I just wanted to highlight that, and if I go quickly now to the FROC 2024 annual report at a glance at page 3, I want to make an observation, ask a question. That's on page 3. That's under the executive summary, I think it is. Yes, page 3. I am reading the last sentence of the paragraph, of the first paragraph, where it starts with information. Information is available on social indicators. But I will just go to the last sentence. It says, the results of the labor force surveys of 2023 indicated that there were relatively high levels of unemployed human resources, particularly between the ages of 15 to 19. Now, my colleague and I, Senator Sinclair, had a brief discussion on the matter, and my comment to him, based on his observation, my comment now is from a different angle. So we recognize that in 2024-25, up to age 18, or just before age 18, you ought to be in school. Yes? Am I correct, Minister? Education? Right. So it therefore means that this 2023 was before that legislative change. Having said that, it highlighted, and that can be one of the, if one say positive, if properly done, impact of the changes, that 16, 17, 18 ought to be in school. So they will not be included or ought not to be included in the unemployment rate, which was high. But the question that would arise, that is going forward, because this is for 2023. So I'm accepting the data. I'm looking forward to see what it will be for 2025, 2026, and to find out how is the new legislation being implemented and the rate of success to ensure that this age group that was significantly impacted by a high rate of unemployment, regardless of the reasons, whether or not there was a mismatch in terms of the education system, whether or not just the youthful exuberance from youths didn't allow them to look for work. Although I would think that given the definition that is normally used to determine unemployment, which I disagree with, because sometimes people just get fed up and they would not show an interest looking for work. If you recognize that all of your efforts have failed, so that when the survey has been done, and if you show a lack of interest in looking for something to do, like you're hanging out at the blocks, they may not include you because the unemployment rate is normally influenced heavily by the outlook of the individuals who are unemployed, whether or not they're interested in looking for work. And these scenarios can be impacted by whether or not the targeted group has confidence in the system as to whether or not, one, the conditions are okay, because in some instances, you find people are not satisfied with the working conditions. So I will be looking forward, through you, Madam President, through the Minister of Education, on what I call the front end, from 18 down, because once you're below 18, you ought to be in school or engaged in some educational or academic or skill training engagement to see what do we do with this group of individuals who will not be reflected in the next labor survey. Because in my view, and if I'm wrong, the minister or some other government official minister here can correct me, that because they are now expected to be engaged outside of being working, the next survey will not capture them. And if it does not capture them, and we are not staying on top of what ought to happen to them, we might have a group of people who is left out of the system that can impact the concerns that our Minister of Social Development has. And our private sector representative indicated that where you can have more deviant development taking place. So I wanted to flag that from the FROC report and to develop on it and to make a request through you so that the government side can give us a report at some stage as to how effective the new legislation has been, what are the support systems that have been put in place, right? Where are the provisions or facilities to have them engage? So that can help us in having an appreciation as to where we are headed. These are just my cursory and observations and comments and questions. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Lewis, for your correction, or I wouldn't say apology, but your correction to include Senator Quince in your Labor Day. I think it's generous and magnanimous of you. And as regards your comments on the FROC, like others, it's insightful, and that is a very interesting and sometimes problematic demography to capture, that 15 to 18. It's really a period of transition, as you correctly state. The Minister of Education would have some input in that, the Minister of Social Development, the Minister of Labor. So there's, it's, pardon? Minister of Youth. It's really quite an interesting demographic in the country. So thank you for zooming in on it in relation to their standing in the labor market, educational system, and otherwise. Senator St. Clair, Roderick St. Clair, you have the floor, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I rise to make some contributions towards the FROC report in particular. I use the at a glance as the summary document, which, whilst we do have it here, we trust that the general public can also have access to this, because it really gives us what is happening around us in a fair way, I would say. I want to start by making a comment and compliment the committee for the work that they are doing. In fact, I noticed on page 26 of the report in the recommendation section, chart 12, the committee is actually asking to have 2 economists on board, because I guess they realize now that the work is so demanding, and to give, a proper report, they need that support. I was briefly trying to get to the act, which I didn't really get to to see if it's if there would be a need to make some adjustment to amend the act in terms of the composition. But from where I sit, I think that the support that they need is important because they provide information for everybody. I say two bagay, so that we could get a better oversight of everything that is happening. So I want to start with this. Of course, the chairwoman's message is being, it is. Her message was very insightful on page 3, I think it is. Just let me to make sure that page 2, page 3. Chairman's message, Southern page 3. But what is important for me in paragraph 2, that was very significant, was some very telling information that the frog captured as shaping the whole economy. They speak about the issue of heavy rainfalls. In fact, there were some specific dates as the 8th to the 19th of November. November normally is the wettest period for the past few years as well. A lot of rain, and how that would have interfered with agriculture outputs. I think we, from the agriculture sector, want to recognize identifying that dilemma that we face. But as you go deeper into the report, they speak also of the drought all year round in 2024. And of course, we know the issue of burial. So I say this to say, Madam President, that, here the FROC is telling us almost what we know and validating a very important factor of output from agriculture, which has to do with food, livelihoods, employment, all of those factors. And we see 3 issues, all tied into climate change and all of those factors. So it means as a country, notwithstanding everything, our whole resilience in terms of handling that is very important. In fact, it was interesting to see that it also highlighted the floods in Grenville in December. But, I mean, every day we get a flood in Grenville, except maybe when there is sun. Grenville floods could flood 3 times a week once there is rain. And we know there is a long-standing issue that needs to be addressed. And we, in that parish, in that town, want to really make some sounding about that. All the businesses in Grenville would suffer. I mean, from the Nutmeg Association, we have one of the biggest buildings, and there's water from all corners. So the fact is that I'm happy that the FRAC has highlighted that, and that we can really spend some effort to really find that solution in Grenville town with this flooding, because it's very disruptive. But more so, in light of the agriculture output, what is interesting in the report is that later on, under the economic and social context, of the report, I didn't flag the page. I think it's somewhere on page. I didn't flag the page on that, but I think it's just before page 21. It's somewhere in that space. What is important is the whole issue of the increase in inputs. And we know a lot of our inputs, again, relate to our whole food security and all of these things. So I say that it's critical that we really pay attention and see how we can use these reports for tactics, not just strategies, for tactics, because 2 important things was highlighted by Madam Chairperson of the committee in her page, that page 3-4 report. And she spoke of, as we build resilience and we look at everything, and the issue of governance and institution, how we respond to all of these challenges, and the whole issue of human capacity. It comes back to the same point we were speaking about this morning. I was so happy because when we had that discussion about the effect in the North and the threat to our food security, I remember specifically making a contribution to that audience, and the issue of institutions in terms of our governance and so on was highlighted. And I really happy to see that this has been flagged. And the issue of governance flagged specifically in this report on two issues. The issue that my dear Senator Angelis raised in terms of our audits, public accounts audits. You know, whilst the FROC is calling for more persons to do economics, the FROC may need to also ensure that our government ministries are properly staffed so that the sort of output that those ministries need to provide is not hindered by lack of human resource. So a word to the wise is enough. And so I think that might be the first part that the FROC need to say, ensure that we have proper staffing such that the reports that we need can be good. Because if the system is not proper, the FROC will always be off and writing this sort of saying, well, we didn't get the reports. And the issue of the Public Accounts Committee, which I sit on, having had one meeting some months ago, and the call for this to be more active. I endorse that because it provides a very important role to not about finding wrong things or finding out, but how do we help to support the system? So how do we ensure that we understand what the challenges are, you know, and we can be better able to lobby and ensure that the executive side, and when it comes to budget and resources, they can be able to get the resources that they need, because it's a good thing to complain about things, but if the system is not right and the resources is not there, we would sit here hoping and living with some sort of expectation that would not happen. So I put that in this context, and I commend the chairperson for highlighting this issue, and then the issue of the human resource capacity to fill the skills gap and all those other things. I think we had a whole discussion on that this morning. I think it's something that we should not leave unwanting in the process. And the last area I want to speak on very briefly is on the issue of the recommendation, where of course one of the, in chart 12, one of the recommendations had to do with the two economists, and the other issue had to deal with the the whole overall compliance with the various aspects of the Act, and how do we support. I think that is what I want to say, and how do we support them in their work, because it should not be seen as just a group of persons and decide doing something there, because you could see they're genuinely trying to catch up, and in whatever way they need the support, we will need to give them. And I rest my case pertaining to this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sinclair, and I do hope that the FROC is listening to your and your colleagues' both review and compliments of the usefulness, effectiveness, and targetness of the report. So it is in order to capture your sentiments, and through the members on the other side, Leader of Government Business, to convey the Senate's appreciation to the FROC for its insightful and effective work. Thank you, Frock. Other comments from any side of the aisle? Senator Rahman, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. I too would like to commend the FROC for the work that they have done and continue to do, the excellent work, because if we don't have figures, Madam President, all we have is words. And words really mean nothing if you don't have figures to verify them. Many people are quite good at speaking, but the figures speak clearly themselves. So a few comments from it, starting off with what my colleague just mentioned. In order to do the work and to crunch the figures, in the recommendation, one of the recommendations, they ask for at least 2 economists. We need to make sure, and I'm repeating it because I support that, we need to make sure that they have the tools that they need to report to Parliament accurately on the state of our economic affairs so that we could debate the issues currently that are present. We want real data as current as it could be. And for that, if they need support, our economy, it is essential for our economy and for predictions that they have that support is made available to them. In addition, in their at-a-glance paper on, in their FROC annual report on page 67, middle of 67, they say, to support what I'm saying, is that the publication of timely and regular fiscal and debt data and information is an important element of fiscal transparency. The FROC therefore continues to urge the timely publication of monthly fiscal summary report, So they need the what? The timely publication from the ministry of the monthly fiscal summary report and the establishment of a release calendar, very important. The establishment of a release calendar to allow for predictability of the dates for the publication of the fiscal reports. Remember, they have to submit reports to Parliament by law at certain times. And so the establishment of a release calendar will set those guidelines as to when they will get it to make sure that we have the information before us. So, looking into the report briefly, we see that from 2023 to 2024, the government took on an additional $48.3 million in debt. So the debt figure went from 2.739 million to 2.787.3 million. We see that from the business, in terms of liquidity in the country, we see that the banks from 2023 to 2024 has given out more credit, and primarily to the private sector. So the banks lending to the private sector increased by 10.4% in 2023 to 2024. And that is to the tune of 192 million. And that's just the banks, not the credit unions. The credit unions also, we see from their report, that they also had an increase of 10.6% in lending, primarily again to the private sector, which is 106.9 million. So in total, almost 300 million, 298.9 million, that's 299 million, was lent by these institutions. A 10% increase in both of them, 10.4, 10.6, to people in this economy, which bodes very well for these credit institutions, meaning that they are doing quite well because they have a 10% increase in their loan portfolios. At the same time, we see from the FROC report that the non-performance loans, the percentage of non-performance loans for banks decreased from 3.4% to 2.9%, so they have less people defaulting. So that's good for their business. And we see with the credit unions, which generally take on a little more risk than the banks, because of when you look to see the clientele, their members, they have also dropped from 8.8% in terms of their non-performing loans to 6.5%. What comes to mind, Madam President, and what I would like to see is the average percentage of these loans. What are our people getting themselves into in terms of what does it cost? What does it cost them in the long term? And I say this to say that whilst we want liquidity in the markets, whilst we're happy to see that 10% and that the credit unions and the banks are actually lending and providing the liquidity that, you know, in prior years they were asked to do. The other concern that comes to mind is that, and in speaking, and the reason why I mention this is that in speaking over the years to young people, and when I say young, I mean under 25, so 18 to 25, that take small loans under $20,000. When you ask them, what is the percentage rate that you got for this loan? The vast majority of them that I have asked cannot tell me what the rate is. They don't know, or they can't remember. And so that is the most crucial thing, what percentage you're paying. What percentage you're paying, how long are you going to be indebted for? Because the purpose of debt is to help build, not to restrain, right? So that is important, and if it is possible for us to get that type of data as terms of averages every year from FROC, what are the average amounts or percentages that are lent across the board? We spoke about climate change. The report speaks about climate change. The report speaks about wars. And I would like to mention this with regard to our economy and our economies in the region, the OECS and to some extent CARICOM. There are major economies in the world that in recent times have done some very serious things. We saw it with the tariffs. We saw a trade war that we have never seen in modern history unfold before our eyes, and it is still going on. Although there's a 90-day reprieve between the two largest economies in the world, China and the United States. We saw that tariffs unprofitable to continue business, such that goods that were headed to the United States, those ships turned around and went back to port because it didn't make sense for them to buy it. What does that mean to us? That means that when the United States, for example, and China had their trade war, there was a glut on the market of goods. And we saw, many of us saw on social media, a lot of Chinese companies going to the world and telling the world how much they actually produce a pair of sneakers for, how much they actually produce a bag for, and how much profit these companies, international companies, are really making as part of their outreach to try to get business elsewhere. What that did for a lot of us in the world is, individuals as well as business, is to drop the price of goods and allow John public to buy from sources that they didn't previously know of, and to get it at good prices. So freight rates actually during that period fell. And in Grenada too, it fell to about $7,000. Now, with the 90-day window that China and the United States have agreed to, where the percentages have dropped from 145% to 30% on the American side and 10% tariffs on Chinese side, freight rates are going back up. So now freight rates last week is to Grenada from Asia is up to about $10,000 US. So a 30% increase in 1 month in freight. That has an implication on the cost of goods here locally in Grenada. Why? Because the US is the primary market. So once they open back up for business, all the available spots that were there for the rest of the world is now heading back to the US. Now this might be boring stuff to listen to, but it's very important because it has an effect on your pocket and my pocket and the nation's finances. And so it is important to understand what's going on in the world and how it impacts us, right? So even when we debate on some things and financial things locally, we have to look at what's going on abroad. And we have to make sure that within the region, we put policies in place to try to lessen these impacts. In addition, when we talk about lessening the impacts, and we speak about the climate, Madam President, we have been affected by the various wars that have happened recently and continue to happen. It seems that every time, if it's not a hurricane, it's a war, right? Something is affecting us. And when they talk about climate change, we speak and we hear that the international, the larger economies, the manufacturing economies, they are the key polluters. And so they should pay a greater share. But we don't ever hear about the effect of wars on climate change. Because when a bomb explodes, doesn't it produce heat? What is the quantity? What is the effect of these wars that are happening very often today on climate change? Where is that study? And who should pay? Because if they are paying for the effect that they have on manufacturing, because they manufacture more, and they give countries credits, shouldn't they be giving countries credits, countries like us that are peaceful countries, credits when they go to war? Shouldn't they be paying the rest of us for destroying the climate? So I've recently read a report where the amount of bombs dropped on Gaza is 5 times the amount that was dropped on Japan. More than that, the report said. I'm being very conservative. So that begs the question. In addition to the humanitarian crisis, which the global leaders don't seem to have the appetite to solve, the climate cost to all of us that live in this world, that needs to be addressed at the international. So when you speak about security and the security conferences that are coming up, these things need to be addressed because we are affected by it. Climate change is serious, it affects us, and they have to pay for the decisions that they choose. Those who enter into the wars, those who benefit from the wars, those who supply the munitions. These have an effect on our climate and our economy and the world's economy, and I'm not hearing people speaking about that. Moving on. Madam President, the wage bill. I heard my colleague for Labour say that it is his hope that they would remove the rule, but I differ. We have seen that the rule has been extended when necessary. We have seen that in recent times while we here have been serving, that it has changed from 11% from 9% to 13%, a huge increase. And so we have seen that that was set before as a gauge, and that the government realized the necessity to make some changes because of the increase in minimum wage and so on, because of the increase in the cost of living, and the private sector did support that in consultations with government. But you must have rules in place. You can't just abandon the rules. You must have rules in place to provide these guidelines so that governments know the areas that they have to perform within. And it must, and if they need to make adjustments, they have the ability to make the adjustments. They can make the adjustments when and if they need to make it. But the rules must be in place so that, because it's not a little bit of the, it's not a small, insignificant part of the budget. The wage bill is a significant part of the government's finances. And so that's why those rules are there. And that's why the economists suggested that we have those rules. So I differ with my colleague. Of course, they will have to enter into the negotiations and so on. And when that time reaches for that rule to be changed, then it will be debated then by whichever parliament, and then it can be changed. But those rules are necessary for checks and balances in the economy. And finally, Madam President, on a positive note, we see that from the report that the government is meeting its targets in terms of the reduction of debt, and that is partly also because of the increase in nominal GDP. So the economy is growing, right? So they are meeting their debt targets, 60% by 2035. They got a green on that, so I commend them on that. And the economy is projected to grow a little more than it was anticipated to grow. So that is a good thing. It means that we're in a better position, or we're in a good position coming out of Beryl, even though Beryl, it is difficult for the economy. We didn't plan for it, and so the effects of Beryl are not as dire on the economy as what it would have been if the economy wasn't resilient. So with that, I thank those who have prepared the FROC report, and that report is 155 pages, and if we don't read it or review it, a lot of work has gone into that. Then we are doing our people a disservice by not coming up here and just passing something without commenting on some of the issues that are in the report. So I didn't intend to take this amount of time, but there's a lot more to discuss in the report, and I'm trying to be brief. I thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Senator Rahman. You are doing the country a service by analyzing carefully and pointedly critical areas covered by the FROC. But the service, the real service, was done by the person, since you're speaking through that person, the person who taught you to love mathematics. Your parents, your teacher, your math teacher, and your others who taught you to love math. We thank them, and I want to pass that on. I heard that, and I'm listening with my ear for youth, my ear for children, my ear for women. And with the ear for youth, I heard how you love math, and I want to pass that on to young people, and to say to young people who may or may not be listening, and math teachers, see how far it can get you. Fall in love with math. Thank you, Senator Rahman, for your oversight function. This is what we are here for. Sorry to be talking so much this morning. But this is what we are here for, to focus on reports and information that's in circulation in the society, and to comment on it, whether it is on wages or trade or debt or loans and so on. Thank you. Thank you for your attentiveness to the report. Any other comments, observations? I see the request for the floor by our first-time morning speaker, your morning maiden address, Senator David.
Thank you, Madam President, and good morning to you. Good morning to all of the staff here at the Parliament and my colleagues on the other side and on this side. And to viewers and listeners, wherever you are, following the proceedings in this Honorable House. I just rise to join my voice in commending the members of the FROC for their dedication and commitment to Grenada and to seeing the business of the country being done and carried out in keeping with established guidelines, and to be able to critically analyze, make recommendations, give the green lights where they're appropriate, point to the amber and the red where they're not. And so I want to commend them and put on record commendations to them. But I want to take the opportunity for the average person listening in Telescope or listening in Subies or in Cafe or Mama Can, I'm choosing just to share a few critical things about or from the report at a glance. The growth performance of the economy. So I want the report highlights that the impact of natural disasters, burial, the rains, and even the floodings that Senator Sinclair alluded to were the context in which this economic report was being considered and conducted. And even before I go on to what they say in the report, I'm happy to report to Senator Sinclair that in the context of the Grenville and the flooding issue, there is ongoing research and activity concerning the flood mitigation. There's the GRIP project that is actively engaged in studies looking at the water flow, where the major catchment areas come from, and the recommendations to have various interventions that would allow to treat with the water. Some of them, I was privy to some of the discussions, and some of them include ponds, include changing the waterway, include windmill discussions. A number of different options are being considered in this review. So I'm very optimistic and very confident that in short enough order, there will be meaningful presentation to the public as to viable options that can be pursued. I'm a Grenville man too, so I'm very concerned about this development and want to see it happen and happen well. But the report indicates that the economy registered estimated growth of 3.7% in 2024. I mean, and that's in the context of burial, in the context of the floods, in the context of droughts that we had just a month before burial. The report highlights that. And the report says this following a growth of 4.5% in the previous year. So it shows that there is a growth trajectory. And that is commendable. The report goes on to highlight that the inflation trended downwards as the rate fell to 1.2%. The inflation trended downwards as the rate fell to 1.2%. And inflation usually refers to the rising cost of goods and services, and he's saying that is trending downwards from 2.7% in 2023 to 1.2%. And I know that there are very commendable measures that this administration has put in place in the last few budgets to mitigate the cost of living, strong cost of living measures, ranging from subsidies on payments towards utility bills, to reduction in VAT to 50%, by 50%, from 15 to 7.5%, the reduction in the fuel charges at the pumps from 550 to 350, I think it is. So there are a number of measures, and then the extension of the list of zero-rated items for persons, including baby formula and sanitary material, a number of things, but we are aware that those interventions contributed to that reduction in inflation. So I'm commending the government for that too, and the FROC for the astute observation that those things have happened. And then it goes on to say that the tourism industry continued to register growth in 2024 as total visitor arrivals increased 4% to 524,708. It goes on to say stayover visitors 9.5%, and cruise ship passengers 2.8%, right? It talks about a decrease in the yachting sector by 24-point-something%, but I think we could understand why that happened. A lot of the yachts in Evening Carriacou and Petit Martin, we saw how they folded up and ended up wherever they ended up during burial, right? And so that wasn't a good period for that sector. But the report goes on to say construction sector registered moderate growth of 2.7%, coming from a decline in the previous period of 11.7%. Now that is a tremendous comeback, and of course we can attribute a lot of this to post-burial construction, but it points to massive growth in that sector for the economy. It says the activities in the wholesale and retail sectors received a boost from the recovery efforts. Yes, the sector grew by an estimated 5.4% in 2024. All right? And the last one I want to say, Madam President, it points here that manufacturing, even the manufacturing sector grew by an estimated 5.9%. Now for me, those are commendable observations that were pointed out by the FROC as part of the growth projections and observations within the last fiscal year. And so I want to commend all of the statutory bodies, all of the, because the Hotel and Tourism Authority, the Tourism Authority, all of the authorities involved in working to see these good figures realized, this positive growth that is being realized and reported here. I want to commend them all, and then again commend the FROC for the preparation of these reports. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank you, Senator David Andrew, for your insightful discovery of where the growth and inflation reduction would have occurred. And as a farmer up in Mamacan, I could become more interested in the economy, plug myself into the growth, and attach myself to the reading of the FROC report. Thank you. Thank you all very much, and commendations again to Mrs. Bain.
Item number 9, petitions. Item number 10, government notices. Item number 11, unofficial notices. Item number 12, questions. Item number 13, personal explanations. Item number 14, motions.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I'm happy to rise at this point in time after my colleague has outlined some very important aspects of the FROC report. And despite what he has outlined there, I am quite conscious that many of us are very cognizant of the fact that Hurricane Beryl did have some serious economic impact on our economy. and I know that the business representative in the Senate is here to make sure that the business community is well taken care of. And also, we depend on the business representative to assist us, the government, in making sure that the business community is well taken care of. Madam President, after Hurricane Beryl, many of the businesses in the northern part of Grenada and Carriacou-Petite-Matic in particular needed significant assistance from the government, and we stepped forward and we did exactly that. And we are still concerned that some of them need to be renovated.
Senator.
Madam President, I'm just giving some preamble before I present the motion.
Okay. You choose your order, isn't it?
Well, Madam President, the business community.
Senator Cox approves.
No, I'm very conscious, Madam President. I'm very conscious. And so, because we are quite aware that the business community need the necessary assistance, I am happy to stand here, Madam President, and present this motion in the form of a resolution for the purpose of Section 33, subsection 3 of the Excise Tax Act. Whereas it is provided by Section 33, subsection 3 of the Excise Tax Act, Chapter 94 of the 2010 Continuous Revised Edition of the Laws of Grenada, hereinafter referred to as the Act, that the Minister may, by order published in the Gazette, and approve by affirmative resolution of the Parliament amend the first schedule and the second schedule of the Act. Whereas the Minister proposes to amend the second schedule of the Act in accordance with subsection 3, with Section 33, subsection 3 thereof, to exempt from excise tax any machinery and equipment that are imported by a registered business for the purpose of replacing that business machinery and equipment that were damaged, destroyed, or otherwise negatively affected as a result of the impact of Hurricane Beryl, provided that in respect of each business, the exemption must first be approved in writing by the Minister on the following conditions. A, the machinery and equipment are imported for use by the businesses and not for sale or exchange. B, the machinery and equipment are imported for the purpose of replacing machinery and equipment that were owned by the business but was subsequently damaged, destroyed, or otherwise negatively affected as a result of the impact of Hurricane Beryl. And C, any other conditions pertaining to the ownership, use, and disposal of the machinery and equipment as the Minister sees fit, and admitted as such by the Comptroller of Customs. And whereas it is expedient that the excise tax amendment of second schedule, Order 2025, which seeks to amend the second schedule to the Act, be approved by Parliament. Now, therefore, be it resolved that pursuant to Section 33, subsection 3 of the Act, the excise tax amendment of second schedule, Order 2025, as set out in the schedule to this resolution, is hereby approved by Parliament.
Thank you, Senator Adrian Thomas. for your innovation and presentation. Honorable members, the question proposed is that pursuant to Section 33, subsection 3 of the Excise Tax Act, the order 2025, as set out in the schedule to this resolution, is hereby approved by Parliament. All those who are in agreement of the proposal will speak to that matter. Pardon. Of an activist. Okay. All those who are in agreement or not with the proposal will speak after the Leader of Government Business has spoken. You again have the floor, Senator.
No, I had a second one.
Senator Andrew.
Madam President, I beg to second the motion as presented by the Leader of Government Business.
Thank you. Senator Adrian Thomas.
Madam President, it seems as though the opposition likes to hear the good stuff that is coming from this side. So I will not miss the opportunity to re-emphasize and overemphasize the importance of this motion to this House and what it means to the Grenadian community and the people of Carriacou-Petite-Matic in particular, especially those that were affected by Hurricane Beryl, maybe just coming close to one year. Madam President, I'm quite assured that the business community will welcome this initiative. Many of them has been renovated, rejuvenated, reorganized, and they are moving on, but at the same time, there are quite a few who really and truly need some more assistance, and the government see it fit to come back to this House of Parliament to see how we can assist these people. And I really hope that this motion will be supported unanimously, and the people in Grenada, Carriacou-Petite-Matic will rest their head, especially the business community, will rest their head very good tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Thomas. Floor is open. I see a request for the floor from Senator Cox, and you're welcome, sir, and I note that you did tender excuse and apology for your lateness. Thank you for doing so, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and let me say a pleasant morning to colleagues. Madam President, in regards to the motion before the House at this point in time, it is clear that we understand the intent of this motion and what it seeks to do in terms of bringing relief for businesses who have been impacted from Beryl and are trying to recover. However, Madam President, I think when this policy decision was taken, I think there was some challenges, and I think in retrospect, I believe it's something that we need to take a lesson from going forward. I think successive administrations have made that mistake in terms of bringing these bills thereafter the fact. And while there are some businesses still recovering, you would want to at least bring this measure as soon as possible, because I mean we had sessions, quite a few sessions after the hurricane, so there was an opportunity for this bill to come. And the reason why I'm saying it is because some of the lessons learned, some of the issues that has arise from the implementation of this policy decision. Like, for example, as stated, which is not stated here, but in terms of the rules or the regulations, what was allowed, like, for example, what was allowed, business were only allowed, I think, one particular appliance. So in some cases, you're allowed to bring in one refrigerator, and there are some businesses that do have 2 or 3. So those were some of the loopholes that was not captured. You might say, for example, a bar, like a sports bar. Sports bar would have sometimes 2 or 3 televisions, and you're only allowed to bring 1. So those were some of the issues that came about from the implementation of this policy. So I wanted to flag that as something going forward. It's something that they need to review, and it should be on a case-by-case basis based on the nature of the business. So for example, a restaurant would have several appliances as against a supermarket. So those were some of the issues. Even for some of the households that were allowed to bring in appliances, they were only allowed to bring in one of each as well. So most homes have more than one television, of course, and a home might have more than one refrigerator that were damaged. As well, if you have upstairs and you have a downstairs apartment, you probably would have a fridge upstairs, a fridge downstairs, and it's damaged in the hurricane. It got damaged in the hurricane. So if the response is to bring easement in that regard, it should take everything into context. So, I mean, I'm just saying this as to give feedback as to what actually transpired. But all in all, I think, as I say, the intent of this motion is what is most important. But I think in the implementation of it, there were some setbacks. So I just wanted to raise that for what's going forward is something that we need to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cox. And I'm curious too whether or not there'll be a retroactive application for my 3rd, 4th, and 5th television set and my 6th deep freeze and my 9th polluting vehicle and otherwise. But any other comments, inquiries? Hearing none. Dear colleagues, the question is, Senator Andre Lewis, you have requested the floor and you have it, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And certainly from Labour's perspective, anything that can assist business in terms of recovery and developing, we must support. You know, some people have a misplaced view. I'm not saying you, I don't accuse you of this, that unions are there to just fight business. But if you don't have business, you don't have workers, we don't have members. Yes, I mean, we are not yet in that society where we probably want to be one day in terms of our dreams of you know, having this broad-based grouping. In relation to, I would just like to ask the following, make a request that because the objective of this amendment is to provide relief to businesses affected by the passage of Hurricane Beryl, can it therefore be treated, and if it is treated and I have not recognized it, I will stand corrected, as a sundown, treated as sundown with an expiry date to be able to avoid abuse in the future. Yes, if it is there, I may have missed it, right? Whether or not there's an expiry time. And a question, is there a definition of machinery and equipment? Example, so we are using this as an example. Does a truck belonging to a hauler qualify? So there's a context in which we are asking. When we review the provision, from Labour's perspective, these are the questions that we had to help tighten, and if not tighten, based on the answers that are provided, it will help us in better understanding. So we support anything that will allow for businesses to recover, especially those that were impacted by Hurricane Beryl. Because the flip side of that is that the businesses that have not recovered, or as to where they were, has also impacted the ability of our workers to continue working. We still have instances where people are off the job that they had because that business has not been able to recover. So we have a direct interest in this matter, and to ensure, to call upon the state, what I will call the supervisory arm of the state and that do implementations, to ensure that wherever these concessions are given, it has been properly used, right? Because the objective of the government also, I will hasten to say, is to ensure that our people find employment and those who are impacted are able to be re-employed. So we have no issues with it. But these are the two questions that concerns that we have. One in terms of the Sundong nature, right? Because of the impact of Beryl, and two, if there's a definition for plant and machinery, or machinery and equipment, based on the example that we use.
Thank you, Senator Lewis, and I offer the floor for her maiden intervention this morning and to thank her for her contribution for Labor Day and for workers in general.
You're welcome. Thank you. Morning, Madam President and other members of the House. I just rise to lend support to the motion posed by the Leader of Government Business. And I wasn't going to comment, but just to offer clarification to this Honorable House as requested by the Senator for Labour. And thank you, sir, for your continued contribution to Labour and your continued support for the tripartite arrangement, and acknowledging that without Labour, there would be no business, and vice versa. Without business, there would be no Labour. And I would certainly be reminding you of that at appropriate moments. Just to speak to the particular query you raised, the motion seeks to amend the first schedule to the Excise Act as provided for by Section 33(3) of the Act. And the first schedule to the Act includes motor vehicles, because you asked specifically about trucks. And it speaks to motor vehicles for use of transport of goods, and covers trucks, new and used. So that's a short answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Claudette Joseph. Senator Rahman.
Thank you once again, Madam President. I rise to support this motion wholeheartedly. How could I not support it? And because it brings relief where it needs to be. Relief when you have a hurricane, and with those of us who have been through more than one, you have different needs at different times. And so the immediate need is shelter, it's food. Food, shelter, security, these are immediate needs. But after these needs are satisfied, then you have to get back to where you were. And this helps businesses to do that. Madam President, you know, sometimes as it relates to the relationship between business and labor, you know, when you have a partner Your partner in your relationship is the easiest person to get angry with, but that's the person you're closest to, right? So, that is why we have to have proper consultation and meet so that we can find the solutions for our nation. Because at the end of the day, business people do really take on a lot of risk. To be a business person is not easy. You mortgage your house, you mortgage your land for this idea. You see a need and you take risk. That's not the average person. The average person does not do that and be willing and taking risks to lose what they already have in order to gain something. That's what business is about, taking risk, calculated risk. And so, of course, when that person takes a risk, they need to be rewarded. And in addition, the business, when you look at what we just discussed, the FROC report, we see that the tax revenue of government from business rose by 5%. 5%. I forgot to mention that. Right? Their collections, right? They often say government often calls it collections, but in reality it is payments, because government don't go around collecting all the time. Business people voluntarily most times pay, and they pay in advance. So it's really payments, not really collections, the better words, right? But we're not going to split hairs on words, on reporting. But the fact is that business people take that risk. And business people take that risk in order to help themselves and by extension, they employ others and so on in the economy. And I commend government for doing this. But we hear the member for Carriacou speak about the time frame, and we have to listen when he's on the ground, so we take the point. But definitely it has to come after the initial period of recovery. And so now when they're building back, and in the last few months and so on, machinery and equipment are very important, and I commend the government for this initiative, as they have done others for the business community, and not only the business community, for the society in general. I commend them. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rahman. Honour Senator Roderick St. Clair.
Thank you, Madam President. It would be remiss of me to not comment on this because it's very important having myself understand what it means to go through disasters in personal lives and hurricanes and other things been affected. Through Hurricane Ivan, we had a fair share. And why this bill doesn't specifically speak Carriacou, I think we have to be careful. I don't think that's a Carriacou on the bill, meaning that is as affected. So I trust that the persons in Sotes and St. Patrick's and those neighborhoods would have likely be affected do participate in this much generous, I would say, support for recovery. Of course, in the direct, what I would say, raw agriculture, primary agriculture activities, the government would have done its contribution there. And of course, being one of the main pillars, agriculture, but of course, the downstream are the business initiative, whether it's manufacturing, retail, trade, etc. They also are investors doing their part. And it's only fair to reach out and to treat in some way as would need be. Of course, the tax exemptions is one of the easiest way. Understanding that, because 90% of what happens, you have to import either machineries, import goods, import whatever it is. And that, of course, is the government in no way is going to go and buy stocks for you and buy this for you. You would have to maybe go to the banks and do your different negotiations. But of course, when it gets here, that which it would cost for doing the border transactions is being offered, and I think that that is a important gesture. Of course, Senator Cox is an important point, and of course, being in his own experience in terms of time, but sometimes timing of bringing it here is one, but of course, it's being implemented. I think that's what is important, and that persons can ensure that they are given a chance to, I wouldn't want to say retroactively, but of course, if they can it's not an insurance, meaning that if you lose 5 television, we are not going to support you back for 5 television, but I don't think that is how it has to be. We have to understand the context of the business and the situation and fairness, and I think this is what it should be, and I think that if it's not like that, persons have a right to do the appropriate complaining, and the appropriate channels, Chamber of Commerce, etc., is there to ably do those negotiations and representation. I think that what we have to look at, though, is always good, how do you move forward? And so the question arises, as we move forward, the whole issue of business risk in those contexts, how do we treat with that moving forward? Ensuring that persons get insured, make sure the businesses are insured is very important. So that will help to augment and reduce whatever other stress that the business is on. Because we are getting the reports, not only a storm, but you have fire, you have different sort of tsunami, all of those things are wrong. And I'm raising this thing from businesses in terms of dealing with business risk and insurance. And how do we treat with that? In 1 year time, 6 years time, do we come back here and have a similar bill? Would we improve on the way that there is a sort of mechanism in place, as Senator Lewis was saying, in terms of this bill resting at some time? So I think it's a learning experience, and those things should be duly considered. Just like how we want to plan for natural disaster and plan for food security, we need to have planning in place for those sort of mechanisms and relief measures that would be called upon, so that we don't act quickly and then try to do it afterwards when it could be done in a really supreme way by doing the different scenario planning. So maybe even within the NADMA framework, whilst NADMA is a broad-based disaster management system organization, the issue is what are the type of legislation and relief measures that need to be considered as another arm of the NADMA resilience system. So I wanted to share that, because whilst we are looking at businesses, we also look at people, you know, and that could also reduce how we manage that social challenges that happen post-disasters. If there is mechanisms in place, then it can be easily administered versus persons having to subject to some sort of on-the-spot thing. And I think that would be how we move forward 10, 20 years down the road as a city future. This is the sort of vision we have to have and build it in. So I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sinclair. I think we've exhausted our debate. Senator Adrian Thomas.
Madam President, I rise to express my gratitude for the contribution that has been made across this House and for the support that has been given to this very important motion. And I look forward to the implementation. Thank you very much.
Honourable members, the question is, you have the motion before you. And with your permission, I ought not to read the 6 paragraphs, but the last one, which is the operative paragraph. And so the question is put on that one, which reads as follows. Be it resolved that pursuant to Section 33, subsection 3 of the Act, the Excise Tax Amendment of Second Schedule Order 2025, as set out in the schedule to this resolution, that it is hereby approved by Parliament. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The motion is passed.
Item number 15, bills.
Leader of Government Business, Senator Adrian Thomas.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I beg to introduce the first reading of a bill for an act shortly entitled the Payment System and Services Bill 2025.
I thank the Leader of Government Business.
A bill to introduce a comprehensive licensing regime, Payment Systems and Services Bill, shortly entitled Payment System and Services Bill 2025.
I thank the Clerk, Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move that the relevant standing orders of the Senate be suspended to enable the bill to be taken through all its stages at this sitting.
Honourable members, the question is that the relevant standing orders of the Senate be suspended to enable the bill to be taken through all stages at this sitting. All those in favour say aye, and opposed say nay. Approved. Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move that the second reading of the bill be taken at this time.
Honourable members, the question is that the bill be read a second time. Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, as I stand here today, we are quite aware that the world is changing and it's changing rapidly. Things have been done differently. Things are required to be done differently if you want to survive. I look at a sector like agriculture, where we all grew up using cutlass and fork and hoe and producing and doing mass production. But today, we have so many ways of doing things. Some people use the term sexy agriculture if you want to survive in this industry. Madam President, we look at the way people shop. We look at the way they spend their money. And if you are in the business of buying and selling today, and you're not prepared to accept electronic cards, you may get left. We look at the ways, Madam President, monies are being transferred. And we look at the development of some of the non-banks institutions and non-banks payments and services. We have no choice. We have no choice as a government to assist this state in adopting to the new technology that is present. Madam President, we have to align ourselves to the regional and international community. We have to find ways and means that we don't make sure that we don't get left as our society, as this global village move forward. And so, Madam President, in examining the current Payment System Act, Cap 227B, we recognize that it lacks the licensing framework that is necessary for emerging non-bank payment services driven by financial technology. We observe, Madam President, that there is no explicit legislation under which non-bank payments and settlement service providers can be licensed to operate. And so, this bill that we are presenting to this House here today, Madam President, the new Payment System and Services Bill 2025, aims to repeal and replace the existing legislation so that we can become aligned to the region and the international community. And so this bill, Madam President, offers 4 main objectives. 1, it introduces a comprehensive licensing regime tailored to risk, promoting innovation and financial inclusion. Number 2, it expands regulations to include non-bank payment providers. Objective 3, it improves safety, efficiency, and financial stability within the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. Number 4, Madam President, it strengthens consumers' protection and boosts confidence in electronic payments. And so as I present this bill, Madam President, it's important to note that it contains 11 parts and 72 clauses. In Part 1, which contains 3 clauses, the first 3 clauses in this bill, basically deals with the preliminary provisions, such as definition and purpose of the bill. Part 2, Madam President, covers 9 clauses in that particular bill, from Clause 4 to Clause 12. And it outlines the administrative matters and central bank functions. The administrative functions and administrative matters and central bank functions. In Part 2, Madam President, it highlights some of the functions of the bank, the central bank, in terms of oversight and the support of payment systems and participants. The central bank, Madam President, has the authority to own or operate payment systems and act as a central counterparty. Within that part, Madam President, the central bank also has the power to enforce interoperability among payment service providers. Another function there, Madam President, is that the central bank also has the opportunity to cooperate with other regulators. And in doing so, this part gives the central bank the authority for the establishment of the Eastern Caribbean Payment Council to advise on payment systems with provisions for its composition, appointment, and operation. Madam President, maybe the largest part of this bill is Part 3, which contains 14 clauses, from clause 13 to 27. And basically, it regulates the licensing of payment system operators and service providers. Under this section, it clearly outlines, Madam President, that operating without a central bank license is prohibited and punishable. We have many different ways of doing business in the past, and sometimes we all become victims of systems that don't have rules and regulations. And many of us may remember the famous SGL fiasco. Madam President, within that section, there are 4 classes of license with the possibility of implementing more as the bank sees fit, obviously in consultation with the minister. To achieve a license, Madam President, obviously there are processes that have to be followed, and the applicants are required to get a response within 3 months. The central bank also, Madam President, has the opportunity and the authority to impose or alter licensing conditions based on risk assessment and based on who they are doing business with. There may be some straightforward companies, but there are others, obviously, you may have to do extra assessment and make the necessary adjustment in order to secure and make sure that the citizens are well protected. Madam President, in Part 4 of this bill, there are 10 clauses, clauses 28 to 37, and basically it deals with the oversight of payment systems. In this section, the central bank is empowered to outline the central bank oversight powers over payment system. And this includes issuing rules, putting systems in place for monitoring, requesting information from the relevant people, relevant institutions. Central Bank, Madam President, has the authority to conduct audits and enforce compliances. It also regulates agent authorization and outsourcing operations. And the central bank, last but not least under this section, sets standards and criteria for payment services and systems. In Part 5 of this bill, there are two main clauses there, three main clauses, clauses 38 to 40. And it describes or sets out the factors how the central bank designates payment system. The criteria clearly outlined. It provides a 30-day window within which an aggrieved party may wish to appeal if they don't agree with what the central bank has outlined. There's an appeal process, and also there's an opportunity for a revocation of designations order if the conditions under Section 39 do not apply. So this section is not that large, but Madam President, is very important. Part 6 of the bill contains three clauses, clauses 41 to 43, and it sets rules for payment system governance, requiring operators to establish clear management rules gives them the opportunity to make their own rules, but those rules have been subject to central bank review, which can vary or invalidate such rules if necessary. Part 7, Part 7, contains 4 clauses, clauses 44 to 47, and it focuses on consumers' protection. Very important section. This section, Madam President, this part in the bill gives the central bank the opportunity and the authority to ensure that the fees, there is some level of transparency in terms of fees and the terms and conditions that are being offered. It requires fee notifications, disclosure of terms, and providing a complaint and appeal process for customers. Part 8 contains 5 clauses, clauses 48 to 52, which deals with settling and finality of payments. This part, Madam President, mandates settlement accounts, irrevocability of transaction once accepted, and the protection of rights in insolvency. Those are the features of that particular part, Madam President. In Part 9, it contains 7 clauses, clause 53 to 59. And basically, it deals with, and it covers winding up an administration. It's not every time we get it right, Madam President, and therefore we have to make provisions, and the bill make provisions for when, as we see in local parlance, when we have to wheel and come again. And here, Madam President, it clearly it states that system operators, participants, and payment providers, participants must notify operators if insolvent or unable to meet obligations. Operators must notify others. No winding up will take place unless the central bank is being notified. If winding up starts, affected parties cannot operate until resolved, and final payments remain valid despite winding up. It further went on to state, Madam President, within that Part 9, liquidators must honor netting arrangements. And also there is a right to enforce claims to enforce claims. But very important, Madam President, one of the last features of that particular section is the issue of foreign participants in the cases of insolvency. And it states and it dictates that any foreign participants in insolvency is governed by the laws of Grenada. Right. Part 10, which contains 6 clauses from 60 to 65, addresses administrative action and penalties. And it goes on to say that the central bank can direct or sanction unfit directors or officers. Penalties apply for non-compliance with key sections within that part. And participants' disputes can go to and must go to arbitration. In the final part of the bill, Madam President, Part 11, which contains 6 clauses, clauses 66 to 72, covers miscellaneous provisions, such as electronic funds transfer and records are enforceable under the laws of Grenada. Central bank can make related rules. A public register of licensees and agents is required. Central bank and the ministers have power to issue rules and regulations to enforce the act. And in closing, this particular section says that good faith actions by officials are protected from liability. Madam President, this is, in a nutshell, is what this very important bill is presenting to this Honorable House. And with that being said, I now commend this bill to this Honorable House for discussion and ultimately approval. Thank you.
Thank you for your careful summary presentation of this bill with its many clauses and its rationale. The floor is open for the debate on the bill. By right, we go to the opposite side of the room. Senator Horsford, you have the floor, sir. In your maiden morning statement.
Madam President. Good morning, Madam President. We're still at morning.
Yes.
And to my colleagues and all present here, I rise briefly to indicate that I am in support of this legislative measure. I'm familiar with it. This and the other measures that are Eastern Caribbean related, Eastern Caribbean Central Bank related bills into the Asset Management Corporation bill and the Deposit Insurance Agreement bill. But particularly on the Payment System bill, the intention, the objective, the animating intent clearly is to bring e-commerce up to speed with the emerging technological instrumentalities of payment conveyance and e-commerce. And I know the central bank is very keen on that. In a former rule, these were the discussions. In fact, these bills have a long provenance, really. They are not legislative interventions of any domestic origin, really. These are piloted by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. But before I take my seat, Madam President, We need to be very, very, very careful. Speaking for myself, I hold the view as I held it when performing a former role engaging this, or the first or early iterations of this bill. I am not quite satisfied or sure that the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank can sufficiently and effectively regulate these things. And you would notice in many of these bills, the central bank is actually ballooning in terms of centralized power. We have to be careful for that. You know the concept of too big to fail, you have to be very, 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 very careful about that. Certainly in payment systems, I understand a central role for the central bank, but I also would recommend, not on this occasion because I guess these are the harmonized legislation that's agreed on at the level of the heads, to at least have first implementation, but it does not prevent us from examining them in our local context and adjusting them. What I suggest is that, certainly on this payment system bill, and given the role that the central bank is given under this legislative measure, I think it is useful to have a domestic entity empowering it to collaborate somehow in regulating the payment systems law in the territory. Because as we've seen since the collapse of certain financial institutions, many harmonized legislations like this one were passed hurriedly with massive and sweeping powers afforded to the central bank. And the financial transaction business is not as simplified as some of the legislative provisions seem to conceive them to be. They're very complex. And we are seeing in certain instances, I don't need to name here because some of them are developing through the courts, the collapse of certain businesses that transact money as money lenders and also these payday loans people. That, notwithstanding what was passed before in response to the collapse of major financial institutions, the central bank and satellite institutions under it for regulation, they couldn't keep up with it. They couldn't effectively prevent some of these collapses. They couldn't effectively intervene in time to avoid losses. So in sum, this is a good measure. It has a long provenance, I support it. But do avail yourself of the opportunity, now that you have passed it in its current form, to revisit that aspect where we must allow ourselves, certainly domestically, our government here must have some input in regulating the application of this law. I would suggest the formation of some entity, because we can't rely on this council. This council is merely advisory. You're getting technical people to tell them how to keep up with this thing. And so we need to be very wary of that potential risk and try and have some meaningful input of our own, not just to receive this harmonized and apply it as we look at our domestic situation and try to have some regulatory input of our own, and that would be my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I'm sure the other side will take it forward, your recommendation. Other speakers on the bill? It's a request from the floor? No. Yes, this side, your side.
All right.
Senator Joseph yields. Senator Cox, you have the floor.
Thank you. Sorry, Madam President, I wasn't seeing no movement from the other side. So, you just got to keep things. I'm working with the leader of government business today. Keep things moving. Yeah, Madam President, I just want to say that I think it's a clear understanding of what is happening in terms of the world, in terms of development, and us staying in line with technology and types of services. And a number of our local businesses are going to be challenged if we do not maintain the requirements that are taking place outside globally. And as such, one of these growing issues is how payments are done. When you travel, you see people make payments through Apple Pay and PayPal and other payment forms. And of course, the central bank in itself, they have started, I think a couple of years ago, with an e-wallet or so, I know that they are working towards having something similar to that nature. However, Madam President, one of the things that I do recognize, there are some key areas of the bill that are quite suitable and fitting in terms of having an oversight committee, in terms of having regulations, in terms of having the licensing and having a process for administering and handling all those. For me, one of the biggest challenges, Madam President, it has to do with the security measure. We, in this space, electronically, most of our persons are now slowly getting involved in terms of doing banking, and so from an electronic standpoint, you still see people standing in long lines. Some of the things that they could do from the computer or the home, they still don't trust. The trust issue is still a big issue for our people. The paper, the pen and paper, the black and white, persons trust that instead of this electronic. And so I think that is the challenge that we have had. And over the past 5 years or so, we have several incidents of some of our financial institutions having attacks, hacking attacks, and even government itself is also susceptible to that. So I think for me, that is where the real challenge is going to be. How are we prepared for that aspect, the security aspect, as we go more and more into the technological aspect of our payment services? That for me is really where the challenge is going to be. Madam President, I always say, every time you hear a financial institution have some challenge, I always hope that they call and say my mortgage is zero, but oftentimes we don't hear that. We hear your savings are the ones that is being affected, and not the debt. So, I just say so. What is what I'm certain that most of us would want to hear. If they hack the bank, why they didn't hack the debt? So. But on a serious note, that is a big challenge. That is a big challenge for us, and I think it's important. I'm not certain that the legislation speaks to that, but maybe on the local side here, through GAFIN, some assurance could be given so that persons can have that certainty, so we can get buy-in. Because if you have those services and persons are not buying into them, they are not going to make sense. And as I say, we're still seeing long lines. So I just wanted to raise that. I believe that is the key issue, the key concern for me as regards to this bill and how it will really take off in terms of implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Cox, on your points on trust and therefore buying in, underscored by security. And we're waiting for that, I wouldn't say we're waiting for the hacking, we're just waiting for the debt elimination. Senator Joseph, are you ready, madam?
Madam President, thank you. I just rise to lend support to the bill now before this Honorable House, as Senator Horsford pointed out, and as well as the Leader of Government Business. This bill is part of a suite of legislation piloted not by domestic governments of the OECS, but collectively, and are aimed at strengthening our financial landscape and environment. And I hear the concern raised by Senator Horsford, which does have merit. But we must recall too that we have a few institutions in the Eastern Caribbean which have all withstood the test of time, and of which as a people in the sub-region we are very proud, and justly so. And the Central Bank, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, stands tall among those institutions, along with the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, of which we are very proud, and which actually they stand out as global models coming from this very small space. And so while the concerns are noted and understood, the central bank is the best placed institution in our sub-region to assist our respective countries in transitioning to the new and technologically driven modes of conducting financial transactions. And we know that largely these new methods are unregulated, except where they are conducted by the traditional banks that already fall under the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. And even so, in some respects, they are not fully regulated. And this is what this particular bill seeks to do, to ensure we bring some order and predictability and regulation to the other modes of doing business as we move with the times and with the technologies, and not get lost in this new world of doing business. So I commend the bill to the Honourable House, as I hear my other colleagues on the other side are also doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you for your commendation of the bill. It's our process here this morning, and the other side has the floor. I think Senator Rahman has requested the floor. I offer it to you, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. So, because it is a harmonized bill, or in general, I support harmonized laws within the region. In order to bring us closer, if we have laws that are very similar or the same, it makes our economies, it's easier to integrate. So generally, this is something good, and I support it. I, however, just want to point out two things. In reading the bill, it reads, part of it, I'll read two parts. It says, since 2008, the payment services landscape has changed dramatically, and the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, the central bank, is keenly interested in nurturing a payment system environment to attract innovative payment services from non-bank service providers in the interest of financial inclusion and reduction in the use of cash. We know that there's a push globally to reduce the use of cash. We have to make sure that our people are properly educated, and this will take time and so on. There are many parts of our economy that still operate on a cash basis, and it is still very important for them. However, it says here the words used are keenly interested in nurturing a payment system environment to attract innovative payment services. So they want to attract these services. Well, these services already exist in many countries. There are many apps that you can use to pay this or pay that, right? You have WeChat, which is a very popular Chinese app in Asia. You have, Alipay and others, other platforms and so on, so many. And so I guess the central bank, it's saying here, is interested in nurturing a payment system, and that I like. However, it says further down in clause 5, and I read, clause 5 of the bill empowers the central bank to support the operations and participants of a payment system. So there are going to be participants that may not be owned by the central bank. So participants of a system, including ownership and participation. Right? So the central bank, the bill empowers the central bank to support the operations and participants of a payment system, including ownership and participation. So the bank is interested in owning, right? But clause 6 says, clause 6 of the bill empowers the central bank to establish, own, operate, or participate in the ownership of a system, and to act as a central counterparty, open and hold account for the office. So they are owning, they have the potential to own and to regulate. Organizations are not very good at regulating themselves. You own and you regulate. And so that is something that is a conflict there for me, right? How do you regulate yourself? And if you have interests in a particular system, that is your system that you have nurtured, which we trust the central bank, right? I mean, they provide their services and they're liquid and all of that stuff. And if they do have a homegrown system, that is great. But if they have other systems that is competing alongside their system, how do they regulate that independently? How do they regulate that independently? How do the others get a fair chance to compete with their system? Is there going to be some subjectivity to their system? And in addition to that, their system might be a safer system for us, because we know that it is less likely that they will rip us off rather than another system that could pose risks or have backdoor problems. So these are just some thoughts that came to my mind. Personally, I would prefer if it were a nurtured system, as it says, that is a system that is ours and regulated by, run by them, and then rather than a system that is outside. But the reality is that that's not how the world works, and that's not how the financial systems in the world works. When you go into different parts of the world, you can just download these apps and you can use these services. And I'm sure that once this opens up, the same will apply here, and they will have to be able to regulate. So the ability to regulate properly is key here. But in general, this is something that is needed, something that is overdue, and it is something that the business community supports. Thank you.
I thank the representative for business and his comments on the bill, proposed bill. Senator Sinclair, you may take the floor, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I was wondering where my friend Senator Rahman was going, and then I see he went and he come back. And I then wonder why it's like telling Bill Gates, although he's not fully involved in his company anymore, to develop another word processing, another suite of Office software, when he has maybe one of the most well-established used software. I would explain. Madam President, of course, this topic is a very interesting topic. Payment systems and services bill. And I heard my good friend, Senator Andrew, a while ago, speak to the people in Mama Can and all of those places. And the truth is, what really is this payment system that we're talking about? And the truth is, I've been doing all the research while this is going on because I'm trying to understand what is this. And maybe in my own way, I would try and see if I understand clearly, such that if I don't, I know there is enough learned persons here to add those clarity. I understand in that consumers, businesses will be doing transactions. They can pay hard cash, they can pay with hard checks, they can do wire transfers, we know of the past. We can even receive money through some of the Western Union and MoneyGram. I understand that. I understand that in time we have our debit cards that we go through the banking systems. I understand that businesses who want to do online transactions have to establish some special account such that if somebody buy the product from Japan or wherever it is, that they can be able to get paid. I read that these are called like merchant accounts. But of course, as was mentioned, you have third-party payment systems, that the PayPal and all these other things. And then you have other type of payment services. I heard the issue about payday loan and all of those different. So there's a lot of things happening. But I also heard, more importantly, the issue of non-cash and doing things differently and paying things online, and how do you facilitate this emerging approach? And whilst we did have a payment legislation before, it didn't regulate it. Consumers maybe was not properly protected and guided. And so what we learned from the first page of this bill, in the notes, explanatory notes, is that our good bank, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, is very interested in having the sub-region, that's the OECS countries, which use the Eastern Caribbean dollar. That's very important. We have one currency, so it's easy to manage collectively. Is interested in this payment system. And particularly to reduce the use of cash. So a few things immediately went through my mind. And every time you do something, there have to be motives. I'm not talking about this thing about all this, what they call it, harmonization. I didn't even motives. Because the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank is not operating for itself. The governor and his team is not operating for themselves. There is something called the Eastern Caribbean, I think, Monetary Council, which make up of the Ministers of Finance, that provides governance to the institution. It's my further understanding you have like the permanent secretaries of the various ministries of finances also operating likewise. In fact, We heard that whole situation recently with the Prime Minister in St. Vincent and his colleagues talking about what's going on with the bank and building, the big buildings. And of course, the region quickly came to the rescue of the governor and his team and said, hey, there's oversight, there are ministers. So I say this to say, Madam President and members of this House and listening in, that the central bank is driven by our ministers of finance, our prime ministers, our permanent secretaries are directly behind this. So to my good friend, Senator Horsford, why is yes you speak about coming to Grenada and coming to the individual countries? I quick on the side to say that our countries must have participated and given direction to this initiative. So when we speak of the central bank of interest, basically is our ministers of finance, our governments in the region have interest in doing that. And so the question is, what is the interest? Of course, to drive the economy and all of those things. But to reduce cash is a key thing. It's not that people will rob you with money in your pocket. I don't think people grab around and take your $20 in your pocket. But the cost of printing money is a significant cost. The cost of paper, the cost to the environment is significant. If you realize what has happened to our money, our dollars in the OECS, they basically, it could wet before, like growing up a dollar, if it wet, you have to be careful, it would start to tear. So they have moved into a sort of polymer kind of technology because the cost of maybe using recycled plastic and all of those things to print those money becomes cheaper. Likewise with the coins, if you look at what has happened. So the issue of less cash, the question arises, is it a matter of reducing costs of business, cost to the business? And so it will be interesting to know over the years, how has the different type of money printed in time has reduced and the whole operating cost of the business of the central bank? And what is the projection in the strategic planning that this initiative will reduce the whole cost of operation? Because if you reduce that, what it means, therefore, is that the institution and the money value of the institution will become stronger because it has less cost of doing business. So I think that is one motivation I am interested in seeing, and I guess others too. The second part has to do now with the whole issue of the D-Cash. The D-Cash is an initiative, and it comes back to the point of Senator Rahman in clause 5 of having your own system. And if you're reducing cash, what is the alternative? We know the central bank has been advocating this issue, the D-Cash. The question is to reduce physical cash. And the question arises, how successful has been that initiative? What has been the uptake? How much persons using this D-Cash? And it's like buying a bus, but there are no passengers to be on the bus. So what is the uptake? And should we spend a lot of time trying to get this D-Cash up and running? Of course, one can argue and say, well, you know, you need to have this system anyways, so that even if the D-Cash is being used by 5 persons, they need to be protected and legislated and regulated. That's okay, I understand that. But the fundamental question is, what is the market? How much persons are involved in D-Cash? Because what I'm worried about, there is something called crowding in. And you see it in different business practices, not business practice, different business systems, where because something is new, something looks lucrative, you find everybody now is trying to come in. And so the fact that this ECCB now is saying we can issue license and permits to different persons wanting to be offering payment systems. So let us suppose you get the PayPal, all of these persons who right now are operating, I would say, technically without being regulated in our space. So that regulation would provide protection for us, and it's okay. So if you do a suite of all of these different payment systems that you in Grenada, in St. Vincent, buying things throughout the world, in China, wherever it is, those systems that you may have to use to click and pay. You might use PayPal, one may use SWIFT, they're different things. But they technically are operating with all legislation. So if something happened to you as a consumer, and you have to get a refund and you didn't get it, how do you regulate to get your money? And I guess the bank is saying, look, we need to protect that. So it's okay. But now, does these persons have to have a license to be listed as one of the options when you're paying? Because there is something called corresponding banking. Because this money will not just leave China. If I click on one of the payment systems in China, it would, in India, it wouldn't just leave the bank. Because money doesn't exist in your pocket, it exists in some institution. So when I click PayPal, let's suppose something in China, it has to leave a bank in China and move across to ECCB and then move into a banking system. So would these people be blocked if they don't have a license permit to operate in this region? This is the question. And so it may look far-fetched, but this is real, because you have to get a license to operate, to provide services for a person in that space. But of course, it's an opportunity, because if we're doing business in Grenada online, we would want somebody in China, in Africa, to be able to access our products and able to use the similar system. But where is our money? Our money is in the local banks and credit unions. So they now, in the banking sector, need to also have this thing built into the system. So ECCB's interest, to me, my good friend Senator Rahman, is to sort of provide a kind of oversight in terms of the movement of the different currencies from country to country. They have to provide that oversight. But if they are also participating as a Dcash operator and want to also develop other systems and provide permit and then also regulate, then I think we have a problem. And I actually had that as one of my points, where competition, while we say competition reduce price, competition in this case will bring us nowhere. And so, while ECCB may have all of this situation, they speak about this commission that's supposed to be established. Maybe it needs to be sort of a kind of hands-off, and they provide that sort of regulatory oversight, like how we are the FROC, and provide the guidance in that, because ECCB cannot participate unless ECCB find some other subsidiary that will not deal with the cash, or they fan it out to some other person as a third party and they operate independently. So these are my concerns in the whole, the operationalization of this stuff, of this payment system, and not really the legislation per se, it's that whole mechanics, because consumers will depend on us to make the decision that would have them protected. And I think this is the concern. Now, I'm not too sure from the banking institution, because it will be interesting to understand what is the banking institution's position on this, because whilst the bill speaks of the banks and credit unions are not directly impacted by this system, because they are already in the governance structure. The question is, money don't reside in your pocket or in your house and move across countries using this other system. And then the last point I want to